Ruth Buzzi went on the Laugh-In set in 1970 for what looked like any other sketch. Soon after, she said something that would ruin her career. The FBI began to keep an eye on her. Sponsors quit, and the makers of the show got a threatening phone call, which made everything different. Finally, the truth about TV's most controversial moment is coming out, and it's worse than anyone thought. In 1967, there was a common trend to comedy shows on TV. It was easy to guess how jokes and sketches would end, and variety shows always went at the same speed. However, Ed Friendly and George Schlatter had other ideas. Their goal was to make a show that felt alive and matched the crazy energy of the outside world. They got the idea for Laugh-In from radical events like Love-Ins and Be-Ins, a comedy project that would go against all TV rules. Schlatter said it was an attack on the senses. The show didn't build up to the jokes or give people a chance to breathe. Instead, it kept coming out with one joke after another very quickly. Every show had more than 350 short scenes that switched between slapstick, satire, and weird humor. It didn't last too long. The pace never slowed down. In a split second, a comic would tell a sharp joke about politics. The screen dressed up in a silly outfit. There were many sources of ideas. It's what came from vaudeville and burlesque. The unpredictable nature came from Ernie Kovac's experimental style, but British humor had the most impact. A clever TV show called That Was the Week had already shown that it was possible to talk about politics and social problems on TV. That idea was turned up to 11 by Schlatter and Friendly. The show never felt preachy or predictable because they used both smart criticism and silly jokes. The building itself felt different. Fast cuts and sudden changes were common in British humor, but Laugh-In took this idea to a whole new level. Things in sketches didn't have a clear start or end. Some jokes were funny out of the blue. People in the theater wouldn't have time to react before scenes changed. It wasn't a mistake that this energy was so wild. It was meant to show how busy modern life is, with lots of things going on at once. Some watchers found it too much to handle. Some people couldn't get enough. It wasn't easy to get the show on TV. People in charge at networks didn't know what to think when Schlatter and Friendly pitched it to them. I thought the structure was too risky. It felt like the pace was too fast. Finally, on September 9th, 1967, NBC decided to show a single big show. They didn't think it would go very far because it was just a test, but the crowd responded right away. The scores were good. It was being talked about. NBC quickly ordered a full season within a few months. Everything that came after the first show was based on it. The show was led by Dan Rowan and Dick Martin, who joked around with each other quickly. A lot of guest stars showed up like Barbara Feldon and Flip Wilson, adding more characters to the mix. The show's unique style was first shown in recurring parts like The Cocktail Party and Mod World. Comedians would say one-liners through small doors on the joke wall, which became a signature piece. Then there was News of the Future, where they said crazy things that would happen, like Ronald Reagan becoming president. NBC first thought that Laugh-In would just fill a time spot and give long-running shows like Gunsmoke a run for their money. But by the end of its second season, it was the most popular show on TV. It was liked by everyone. Kids and adults could both watch it together. Some people really liked the silly fun. Some people liked the biting humor. Laugh-In had something that would make everyone laugh. Even though Dan Rowan and Dick Martin didn't seem to go together. That's what made their Laugh-In so great. As a young group, they used contrast to build a funny act that they did in nightclubs. Rowan was the smooth talker who was always in charge, while Martin played the dummy who had no idea what was going on. The chemistry between them carried over to TV. Laugh-In was different from all the other shows on the air when it first started on January 22nd, 1968. The show didn't just find an audience. It kept them interested with its fast pace, random humor, and silly skits. By the 8th episode, it was the most watched show in the United States. Rowan and Martin made sure that things didn't go totally crazy. It was the back and forth between them that kept the show going, even when everything else was a mess. Martin would say something stupid. People would laugh out loud when Rowan rolled his eyes. At the end of each show, Rowan would say good night, Dick, and Martin would reply, good night, Dick. This became one of the most famous TV phrases. They were more than just hosts, though. Rowan played the over-the-top military figure General Bullwright, and Martin played Leonard Swizzle, a drunk partygoer who was always a little too drunk to do anything. The show moved so quickly that there was no time to prepare for the next sketch. If you missed a joke, another one was already coming. That kind of wild energy was new to TV, and it changed comedy for good, making the way. There are some big stars who didn't even know they were on Laugh-In when they first started. One of them was Goldie Hawn. Her first appearance on the show was in 1968. She was a bubbly blonde who laughed at every joke. She wasn't acting, that much was clear. George Schlatter, the producer, told her not to practice so that her responses would be real. People love her laugh so much that it spread quickly. She won an Oscar for Cactus Flower just 2 years after that, and quickly became one of the biggest stars in Hollywood. Lily Tomlin joined in 1969 and made a name for herself right away. She did more than just act. She made up personalities. Someone who had a loud voice and made life hard for everyone who picked up the phone was Ernestine, one of her best characters. The calls all began the same way. One ringy dirty, is this the person I'm talking to? There was also Edith, and a 5-year-old who sat in a big rocking chair and spoke for long periods of time, always ending with, and that's the truth. Tomlin was one of the show's biggest stars because she could make figures that people would remember. She did even better after that. After that, she was in movies like 9 to 5, and quickly became one of Hollywood's most well-liked comics. This was not how Henry Gibson did things. He kept things simple while the rest of the show was loud and crazy. It was a song by Henry Gibson. He would stand up, hold up a big flower, and say it. After that, he would read a short, a sarcastic poem that was either totally silly or a smart take on current events. His calm presence stood in stark contrast to the show's crazy energy. Besides Laugh-In, he used his fame to talk about environmental problems. He wrote poems and articles about it long before it became a popular cause. It was impossible to avoid Jo and Worley. People were drawn to her because of her loud voice, crazy outfits, and funny style. It felt like a performance every time she told a joke. She often sang in an over-the-top operatic way or added a dramatic pause before a joke to make it funny. Her collection of jokes against chickens became one of her most famous running gags. They were so strange that they became a part of who she was. Some of the most memorable parts of the show were created by Arte Johnson and Ruth Buzzi. Gang, a German soldier would leap out from behind a bush and say, "Very interesting, but sh dashed." That line became one of the show's most quoted lines. Another one of his characters, Tyrone F. Horn, pronounced Horn-I, was a creepy old man who tried and failed to flirt with Gladys Ormsby, played by Ruth Buzzi, in every show. She did a great job with the part. When Tyrone got too close, Gladys was always ready to swing her purse at him. She was grumpy and dressed down. People in the crowd laughed out loud every time she hit him. Simple things were always done, but they never got old. She became one of the show's biggest stars and was nominated for 5 Emmys and a Golden Globe. Guest stars were one thing that made Laugh-In stand out. There was no telling who would show up. John Wayne showed up one time in a bunny suit. Sammy Davis Jr. gave the sketches his own unique brand of cool. Orson Welles, who was known for having a deep, powerful voice, joined in the fun. But Richard Nixon was the most surprised guest. Richard Nixon did something in 1968. No one was ready. It was on national TV, and he tried to be funny. The GOP presidential candidate looked at the camera and asked, "Sock it to me," for 6 awkward seconds. His speech was stiff. Even though his tone wasn't clear, it worked. A lot of people laughed. In one of the most close races in U.S. history, that one small thing may have helped him win. The country was in a lot of trouble that year. The Vietnam War went on for too long. There were protests everywhere. Both Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy were killed. It felt like America was breaking up. Nixon was trying to get back into politics after losing the president's race in 1960 and the race for governor of California in 1962. His biggest problem was how he looked. He was seen as serious, cold, and not in touch with people. After that, Rowan and Martin had a Laugh-In. It was the most watched TV show in the U.S. It was quick, loud, and unpredictable, and it was full of short comedic bits and catchphrases that kids love. Everything was made fun of on the show, even politics. Nixon had some people who thought going on Laugh-In was a bad idea. Some people thought it might make him seem more likable. A Republican writer for the show, named Paul Keyes, who backed Nixon, worked hard to get it done. He said that some humor could change how people felt about Nixon in a short amount of time. Nixon went to NBC's Burbank studios on September 12th to film his piece, but there was a problem. He was told to say something silly like, "You bet your sweet bippy." Nixon said no. He didn't want to look stupid because he didn't understand the phrase. He finally agreed to one line. "Please sock it to me?" It took work to do even that. 6 tries were needed to get a shot where he didn't look mad or confused. George Schlatter, the producer of the show, later said that he rushed the video out of the studio because he was afraid that Nixon's team would try to stop it from airing. People were shocked when the show aired on September 16th. Nixon showed up for only 6 seconds, but it caused a big stir because it was so unexpected. The way he was acting made people laugh. He didn't seem funny or attractive, but he did seem like a real person. That was important in politics. Laugh In was the most popular show on TV at the time. That meant that Nixon's appearance was seen by millions of people. A few political experts think it helped him win over people who weren't sure yet, especially younger ones. The race for president was very close. He lost the election to Hubert Humphrey by less than 1% of the vote. It was a very close race, so every second was important. But Humphrey did something wrong. He was also asked to be on Laugh In and was given a simple line. "Yes, please give it to me." He said no, though. He believed it would show that he wasn't taking things seriously. Nixon chose to risk it, but Humphrey didn't. At the end of the day, one candidate used current media and the other didn't. Politicians often go on late-night talk shows these days, but in 1968, it was risky for them to do so. It worked out for Nixon. Harry Belafonte shot a sketch for Rowan and Martin's Laugh In 1969, but it was never shown. To make a strong point, not only did he sing the Calypso song, Don't Stop the Carnival, but what played behind him made the performance really stand out. The screen was filled with footage from the 1968 Democratic National Convention protests in Chicago. Instead of the normal bright and colorful set, there was this. Police were hitting people who were protesting in the streets. There was tear gas in the air. People at the protest said, "The whole world is watching." You couldn't avoid it. It was honest and raw. One of the most shocking events in modern American history was the protests. A lot of people came together in Chicago to protest the Vietnam War. They ran into a huge group of cops and National Guardsmen. It got really bad outside of the Conrad Hilton Hotel on August 28th. Batons were swung at marchers who were not armed. People ran away when tear gas was used. Reporters caught the chaos on live TV, so everyone in the country could see what was going on. Now that it had been a year, Belafonte wanted everyone to remember. NBC wouldn't show it. The bosses believed it was too dangerous. They were afraid of backlash, especially from marketers and audiences who were conservative. When the video was first shown in 1968, it made people all over the country very angry. It goes well with Belafonte's song Now. It turned into an even bigger fight. That was too risky for the network to take. The whole section was cut off before it could be seen. That was not a new way to control people. In the 1960s, TV networks were very picky about what they showed. They didn't talk about racist issues, war, or police violence because they didn't want to lose listeners or sponsors. Even Laugh In, which is known for breaking rules, had to be careful. Later, the show's creator, George Schlatter, said that cutting Belafonte's section was a mistake. It could have been one of the most powerful things ever seen on TV. There was no silence from Belafonte. He said that NBC's choice was weak. He had used his music and fame for years to make his own music, to defend rights for everyone. He thought this censorship showed that networks cared more about making people feel good than telling the truth. The lost part became a what if. It was a moment that could have been important in history, but was erased before anyone could see it. Besides that, Rowan and Martin's Laugh In 1969 was a clear attack on Vice President Spiro Agnew. He often used strong, exaggerated language to attack people who were against the Nixon government. Another well-known quote of his was "Nattering Nabobs of Negativism," which was written just for him by scriptwriter William Safire. He liked words that started with the same letter, so he often used sentences like puissant pussyfooters and defeat core of impudent snobs. Because of the way he talked, he was easy to make fun of. Laugh In jumped at the chance and made his style bigger than life, making him into a parody. Nixon's White House and Agnew were not amused. It was said that his office called NBC to complain, but this wasn't just a joke about him. It showed that the gap between lawmakers and the media was getting bigger. One of the most popular TV shows was Laugh In, touching a lot of people every week. It showed how comedy was becoming a strong way to talk about politics by making fun of Agnew. Agnew wanted to get Nixon's quiet majority to support him by criticizing the press and smart people. He turned himself into an easy joke instead. It was clear from how he reacted to the spoof that he could give it but not take it. The more he fought back, the more comics used him as a subject for their jokes. This moment showed how fun can show how silly politics are. At a time when people were very split over Vietnam and civil rights, comedy was more than just a way to pass the time. It changed how people saw it. The Flying Fickle Finger of Fate award was another way that Laugh-In stood out. The most popular running jokes on the show. The award was created in 1968 and given to people or organizations that did something stupid or bad. The award was a gold hand with a finger pointing that stood on a wooden base. It was a funny and straight way to tell someone off. President Lyndon B. Johnson was one of the first winners. The show made fun of him for making the Vietnam War worse. The Pentagon also got an award for wasting tax money on directories that were useless almost right away. On Laugh-In, real problems were often turned into funny situations, pointing out waste and unfairness in the government without making the show feel preachy or heavy. The changeable finger of fate worked so well because it brought up important issues in a fun way. The show didn't get shut down because it made political criticism funny, but the people it made fun of did notice. A lot of the time, the way lawmakers responded to jokes made them funnier. That part of the show showed that TV wasn't just for fun. It could change the way people talked about it. In 1970, Laugh-In took an even bigger risk with a sketch that got a lot of attention right away. Police cops were compared to pigs in the segment. It became well known when the Black Panther Party used it in cartoons to protest against police abuse. At the time, it was shocking to see this kind of imagery on popular TV. The FBI thought it was a big issue. The Bureau began CONTLPRO, a secret operation to discredit radical groups, when J. Edgar Hoover was in charge. Hoover said the Black Panthers were the most dangerous group to the safety of America. People thought that any news outlet that seemed to side with them was dangerous. As soon as Laugh-In showed the sketch, people were upset. Law enforcement groups were furious and said the show spread false information against cops. There was a lot of disagreement in the country in this case. There were more and more protests against police abuse. And the Black Panthers made people all over the country talk about racism. Some people who saw the sketch thought it was a true picture of the times. Some people saw it as an attack on the police. What people did showed how strong comedy could be. Early LGBT and LGBTQ+ campaigners also didn't like the show. Tiny Alice, played by Dick Martin in drag, was a figure that showed up over and over again. The character was supposed to be funny, but it was based on over-the-top images of gay men who act girly. It felt bad to see LGBTQ+ people like this when they were fighting for respect. There was more to it than just Laugh-In. It was also how Hollywood treated gay characters in general. Majority media often used drag shows to make gay people look like they were doing something silly. People who were activists wanted to be taken seriously and not be treated like jokes. It got even hotter because of the time. It had only been a year since the Stonewall riots. LGBTQ+ activists were speaking out more and asking for better treatment in the media and other places. Someone like Tiny Alice made it seem like being gay was something to laugh at instead of taking seriously. George Schlatter, who made Laugh-Ins, supported the show. He said it made fun of everyone the same way. That argument didn't work for activists, though. There were different kinds of jokes about powerful people and jokes about underrepresented groups. As views changed over time, these kinds of portrayals would become less common. But in the early 1970s, gay identity was still seen as a simple way to make people laugh. Also, the popular catchphrase by R.T. Johnson, "very interesting," was never in the script. A mistake led to it, and some people did not like it. Johnson played Wolfgang, a German soldier who had no idea what was going on and still thought World War II was happening. He made up the line on the spot in one scene. The line came from the 1942 movie Desperate Journey, but Johnson said it in a way that was completely off the wall and just right. Made it one to remember. People really liked it. It wasn't so good for the creators. They were afraid that too much improvising would throw off the fast-paced beat of the show. Johnson didn't stop, though, and soon that line was one of the most quoted on TV. Fans began saying it everywhere. It began as a small joke, but became one of Laugh-In's most famous moments. Goldie Hawn's smile lit up the screen, but she was having a hard time behind it. She became a member of Laugh-In when she was 22 years old. America fell in love with her as the bubbly, naive redhead. But the stress was too much for her. Each day, she thought she had to be great. Always funny, always happy, and always on. It was very tiring. In the end, she said that she cried almost every day while she was on the show. We didn't have time to breathe because of how busy we were. After a joke or scene that didn't go well, she felt like she had failed. I had panic attacks because of the worry, and so she started going to therapy to help her get through it. It got too much for her after 3 seasons. In 1970, she quit the show to try her luck in movies. She made the best choice of her life. There was more artistic freedom for her in Hollywood than on Laugh-In, where she had to follow rules. But she didn't forget what she went through, even when her career took off. She became an advocate for mental health later in life, using her own problems to help other people. She wanted to make people laugh while she dealt with her own fears and let them know they weren't alone. Even though Laugh-In liked making people angry, it still had to deal with editors. In 1969, one of the strangest happened over a single word, pregnant. At the time, people in charge of the networks thought it was inappropriate for TV. It was seen as rude to say the word out loud, even in a joke. In the scene that caused the trouble, Ruth Buzzi's character was clearly pregnant while holding a sign that said "Make war, not love." NBC execs became scared because they didn't want to upset conservative fans. They wanted it changed. George Schlatter, the producer, said no. He said that pregnant people shouldn't be able to be on Laugh-In if they could get away with making inappropriate jokes. The show had always been on the edge, and this was no different. He didn't give in because he knew the network couldn't lose Laugh-In's huge following. NBC finally gave up. The word stuck around, and the sketch aired. It was only a small win, but it was important. It showed that the TV was changing. Things that were once seen as too offensive were slowly becoming normal. Something had changed by the 5th season of Laugh-In in 1971. It no longer had the same amount of force that made it a phenomenon. It was felt by the audience. The same joke, the exact same catchphrases. What was new at first seemed like it had been done before. Goldie Hawn and Lily Tomlin quit to go after bigger roles. Their withdrawal left a hole that was hard for new cast members to fill. The numbers went down by almost 40%. What was going on behind the scenes wasn't better. The show's first director, George Schlatter, also left around this time. Without him, it was hard for Laugh-In to grow. Things were changing quickly on TV. Funny things changed in the early 1970s. They stopped being quick jokes and silly things and started being more realistic. People wanted funny things that were true to life. Laugh-In tried to keep up, but it never quite got a handle on things. By 1973, NBC had turned off the show after 6 seasons. On May 14, 1973, the last show aired. The show was almost over at that point. Of what it had been, Dan Rowan said something easy but honest at the end of the episode. "We're out of gas now." There was a rare moment of truth on TV. The show broke rules, pushed the limits, and changed the way humor is done, but everything comes to an end. This was the end of Laugh-In. However, its effect didn't go away. In just 2 years, in 1975, Saturday Night Live came out, and it was hard to miss the fast-paced humor and similarities between the two shows. Sketches that were out of the blue, and how they used humor to show how things were in the world. The show's creator, Lorne Michaels, has never rejected the link. The groundwork was laid by Laugh-In. It was used by Saturday Night Live. Both shows made stars. Goldie Hawn and Lily Tomlin came to the world thanks to Laugh-In. They were presented on Saturday Night Live by Chevy Chase and Gilda Radner. There was a big difference between the two comedians whose jokes people still remember. Laugh-In loved silly and funny things. Saturday Night Live was better. Not only did it make people laugh, it also said something.